Hey everybody, I'm Ryan, and over the course of the past few weeks, we've been talking a lot about the Selesnya Cage deck. We've done a deck tech, we've analyzed the card choices in the deck, the overall strategy of the deck, how to play the deck, how to sideboard with the deck against the top 10 most popular decks in Standard. We've looked at tips and tricks and nuances and play patterns, flex slots, and different builds with the deck. So I wanted to combine all of them into one video, one giant deep dive. Enjoy. So this is the Selesnya Cage deck. Effectively, this is a green-white aggro deck that capitalizes on Collector's Cage because we're putting +1/+1 encounters on stuff anyway. Now, the mana base is straightforward. It's just green and white lands, even the green-white man land, and we're playing a single Mirex just for a little bit of additional aggression. But let's talk about the combo in the deck first. It's Collector's Cage. Collector's Cage is a pretty disgusting artifact. It's 2 mana, it has Hideaway 5. So basically you look at the top 5 cards of your library and you put one face down underneath Collector's Cage. And then you can pay 1 mana and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So this is obviously insane if we get an Overlord of the Mistmoors or a Whitleaf Liege underneath it, or really even like any of these 3 mana spells underneath it. Also notice this can end up being a combat trick as well because it's only 1 mana to do it and you can do it as much as you want even if the thing is no longer underneath it. And so making our creatures bigger in that way is just absolutely great. That being said, let's talk about these cards that we really want to be comboing with. Overlord of the Mistmoors is a 6/6 with impending 4 for 4 mana, and when it enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. This is just the end of the game for a lot of decks. A lot of decks can't answer 3 giant things at once, especially as early as turn 3 with Collector's Cage is just really, really good. And then Whitleaf Liege is really solid. Is a 4 mana. Other green creatures you control get +1/+1. Other white creatures you control get +1/+1. Which, by the way, that means these dual colored cards like Malira and Seraphic Steed get +2/+2 because they're green and white. And if a spell or ability opponent controls causes you to discard this card, put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it in your graveyard, which is really good against the Esper and Dimir bounce decks. Because they're looking to have you discard. So it's really our combo, but Collector's Cage is good with just really anything in our deck. We're going to be using these alongside Mana Ramp in Llanowar Elves. It allows us to attack and then also be able to get out our creatures much, much faster, like in any green-white aggro deck. Pawpatch Recruit is an excellent 2/1 for 1, however, has Offspring 2, which you create a 1/1 copy of it, has Trample, and whenever a creature you control becomes a target spell or ability an opponent controls, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than that creature. So this allows you to have even more +1/+1 counters, spread out that power and toughness even more so that we can have Collector's Cage happen, and it's just a really aggressive creature as well. We're playing 2 Malira Living Cure. It's a 3/3 for 2, which is just like really powerfully costed. If you would get 1 or more poison counters, instead you get 1 poison counter and you can't get additional poison counters this turn. So that's good against the weird poison decks, but that's not really why we're playing it. But we can exile Malira Living Cure to choose another target creature or artifact. When it's put into the graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it's really good at like protecting ourselves against removal spells. If we have a Malira and an Overlord, they can't answer the Overlord if we have a Malira because then we're just going to get the trigger again, which is just really, really disgusting. So it's a very aggressive card and also protects our big payoffs over here. Playing 2 Seraphic Steed. It's a 2/2 for 2 with first strike and lifelink, very good against the aggressive decks. And whenever Seraphic Steed attacks while saddled, create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying and has saddle 4. So saddling it is a little bit difficult, but it can become like create a creature on a stick for no mana, and having first strike means that after a +1/+1 counter or 2 from like Collector's Cage or Pawpatch Recruit or whatever, it becomes pretty difficult to block. We're also playing 4 Sandstorm Salvager. It's a 3 mana 1/1. When it enters, create a 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature token. So it's a little reminiscent of like Blade Splicer. And you pay 2 mana and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature token you control. They gain trample until end of turn. So that's really solid because you can put a +1/+1 counter on the golem, obviously, on the flyers you get from Overlord, on the Offspring from Pawpatch Recruit, on the Angels from Seraphic Steed, on the Bats from Sanguine Evangelist, on the 4/4 from Toby. That does it really, really well, so your creatures get really big pretty fast. Speaking of Toby, there's a 3-mana 1/1 where when it enters, you get a 4/4 white beast creature token. With this creature can't attack or block alone. Don't worry, little guy. We're going to be attacking with everyone. And as long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. So Toby can just be a really interesting card that can just like launch all of your creature tokens, which is really fun. And then we have 4 Sanguine Evangelists, which is a 2/1 with Battle Cry. Battle Cry is when you attack, all your attacking creatures get +1/+0. And when Sanguine Evangelist enters or dies, create a 1/1 bat black creature token with flying. So notice we're going very, very wide. We're ramping our mana. We have a little combo in Collector's Cage, and we're putting a ton of +1/+1 counters on our creatures. As far as supporting instances of sorceries, we're playing 2 Sheltered by Ghosts. It's a 2-mana aura where when it enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghost leaves the battlefield. An enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has lifelink and ward 2. Very, very good against the aggressive decks. And they're playing 3 Parting Gusts, which is a 2-mana instant, gift to tap fish. Exile target non-token creature. If the gift wasn't promised, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control with a +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So this is really good to get things out of the way, sure, but we can just not promise a gift to exile one of these creatures that hasn't entered the battlefield effect, like Overlord of the Mistmoors, like Sanguine Evangelist, like Toby, or whatever, which is not only a way to protect our creatures, but also a way to get the end of the battlefield trigger again, which is really solid. Now, as far as the sideboard goes, Elspeth's Might is very good against these really aggressive decks. Destroy Evil, good against things with big-butted blockers like Shieldred or Preacher of the Schism, and good against enchantments. Invasion of Gobakhan is a hand hate. Notice like board wipes are really good against these Selesnya aggro decks, so that's really good. 2 more Shelter by Ghosts for these aggressive decks. Aven Interrupter for decks that spend a lot of mana on spells that are very impactful. So yes, board wipes are included, which we do with Invasion of Gobakhan, but also against decks that we could counter and be mana positive with the Aven Interrupter. Playing 2 Split Up. I don't know why there's not a number there, but this one-sided board wipe against other creature decks. And we could go up to 4 Wiltleaf Liege for these decks that are making us discard. It's also just like a decent card to bring in and a powerful card to bring in if we have too many cards we need to bring out against a certain deck. So this is Selesnya Cage in Standard. And let's talk about the sideboard, just like the original plan is. We're playing 2 Elspeth's Might for aggressive decks, but also the enduring creatures. We're playing a single Destroy Evil against blockers with big butts, like in Golgari, but also good enchantment hate. Invasion of Gobakhan as sort of additional hate against board wipes, because that's why we have Aven Interrupter in here. Sheltered by Ghosts for additional hate against the red decks, joining the 2 Sheltered by Ghosts in the main deck. The 4 Aven Interrupter, like I said, is hate against board wipes is the big thing. This is a green-white aggro deck in essence, so a single board wipe can really be very bad for this deck. But also it's decent against decks that are looking to like tap out for stuff like big mana things. We're playing 2 Split Up as a one-sided board wipe on our side, and 2 more Wiltleaf Liege, mostly because Wiltleaf Liege is a decent card, to bring in if we need to bring some stuff out, but also really, really good against the bounce decks, being able to just put it on the battlefield if they play Hopeless Nightmare. So, the most popular deck in Standard is Gruul Aggro. We're going to sideboard the same against Gruul Aggro as we do against Gruul Prowess, which is the 6th most popular deck, and Mono Red Prowess, which is the 8th most popular deck. So it's going to sideboard against all of them. We're bringing the Elspeth's Mites, obviously. We're bringing in the Sheltered by Ghosts, bringing in the Split Ups, and we're going to be bringing out the Collector's Cages. It's just too cute. Like, I realize like we get to cheat big things on the battlefield, but it's simply too cute. And I'm bringing out the 2 Wiltleaf Lieges. I like the Overlords just because we're able to have these 2/2/1s with flying. It's a lot of blockers. The trample hurts, but I think it's worth it. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Gruul Aggro, Gruul Prowess, and Mono Red. The second most popular deck is Esper Self Bounce, and we're going to sideboard the same against Dimir Self Bounce as well. I'm a fan of Elspeth's Might. It pretty much kills everything in the deck besides like Kaido. And doing that is pretty important. And we're bringing in the 2 Wiltleaf Lieges to kind of get them with the Hopeless Nightmare silliness. We're going to be taking out the Sheltered by Ghosts. It is for the aggressive decks. And we're going to be taking out the Malira. They aren't necessarily like directly destroying our guys. Instead, it's things like Nowhere to Run and whatever. Post board, there's a little bit more, but I still don't think it's worth it. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Esper, and Dimir self-bounce, which is the second and third most popular deck in Standard. Moving on to the fourth most popular deck in Standard is Golgari midrange. Against Golgari, we are bringing in Destroy Evil. I'm also a fan of the Aven Interrupters because, one, they have like an adventure card and we kind of get them with that, which is kind of cute, but also Harvester of Misery can be pretty devastating, as well as things like Gix's Command and things like that. That being said, it means Invasion of Gogakon's also pretty good. Bringing out the Wiltleaf Lieges, bringing out the Seraphic Steeds, mostly just because it's really hard to capitalize on it when they're killing our guys, and we need to make sure things live in order for that to happen. We're taking out the Sheltered by Ghosts. It's just, yes, it's removal, but it's just not good enough removal. I'll just be shaving a single Paw Patch Recruit. And this is how I'm going to sideboard against Golgari midrange. The fifth most popular deck is Dimir midrange. Against Dimir midrange, because of Gix's Command and Malicious Intent, we're bringing in the Aven Interrupters and Invasion of Gobakons. And then we are going to be bringing out similar things, the Seraphic Steeds, the Wiltleaf Lieges, and the Sheltered by Ghosts. Not really much else I care about in the sideboard, so this is how I'm going to sideboard against Dimir midrange. We already talked about the sixth most popular deck, which is Gruul Prowess. So the seventh most popular deck is Domain. Against Domain, Destroy Evil is absolutely unreal. We also have to bring in Invasion of Gobakon and Aven Interrupter. They combo with each other, by the way, which is pretty dope, because like a single Sunfall can just end the game for us in like a lot of situations. And so bringing out Sheltered by Ghosts like we do against every non-aggressive deck, bringing out Wiltleaf Lieges, again, because they are really in our deck for the bounce decks, which is, they're very popular, so it's totally fine. Bringing up Malira, because most of the destroying or whatever is exile removal, and then Seraphic Steed, because they just have a lot of removal, especially post-board. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against the Zer Overlord's Domain deck. We've already talked about the eighth most popular deck, which is Mono Red Prowess. So moving on to Jeskai Convoke, we'll be bringing in our Elspeth Smites. Also, Shelter by Ghost pretty good because it is an aggro deck. And then Split Up is very, very good as well. We're bringing out these Wiltleaf Lieges. We'll be bringing out the Maliras. And then we are going to shave on Overlord of the Mistmores. Just because I don't really like this card against Convoke, because yes, it can block 2 things for 4 mana. Very rarely do we actually get to kill anything that is relevant, and they're going so wide, just like 2 blockers isn't quite good enough, especially when we have to pay 4 mana for it. So that's how I'm going to sideboard against Jeskai Convoke. And then lastly, the 10th most popular deck in Standard is the Azorius Tempo deck, the Azorius Oculus deck, whatever you want to call it. Destroy Evil is great. It beats up the 2 cards that actually matter. We're bringing in Split Up because, again, it's really important to answer those 2 cards. You know, that's super, super important. We're bringing out the Shelter by Ghosts, and then we're going to shave on a Wiltleaf Liege, and that's how we sideboard against Azorius Oculus. So these are the cards that you're pretty much bought into playing if you're playing Selesnya Cage. These 50 cards in the main deck, which means there are 10 flex slots, and these, oh wait, 0 cards in the sideboard, because this deck's just not figured out yet, especially enough in the sideboard, you know, that nobody's really agreeing on literally anything. However, we are playing these 50 cards in the main deck. If you want to check these out, please pause the video now. However, we're here to talk about the flex slots. So what do we play in those 10 slots in the main deck and these 15 slots in the sideboard? So these are our options. We have these 29 options for those 10 slots in the main deck and 29 options for those 15 card slots in the sideboard. So let's jump into it. And in order to understand these first 2, we first need to look at a different innovation as Aether Drift has come out. So some versions are now playing less Wiltleaf Liege and are playing 4 Bright Glass Gear Hulk. So that is an option. It's a 4/4 for 4 with first strike and trample. When it enters, you can search your library for up to 2 artifact, creature, and or enchantment cards with mana value 1 or less, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. So this is, it gives us the ability to not only get it off of Cage, but when it enters, we get to sort of search our deck for something to apply more pressure, or really allowing us to kind of toolbox our deck. And so as far as options for that toolbox that aren't already non-flex slots, we have Haywire Might. Haywire Might is a 1 mana artifact creature 1/1. When it dies, we gain 2 life, and we can pay 1 green mana to sacrifice Haywire Might, exile target non-creature artifact or non-creature enchantment. This is a great toolbox option if we don't want to grab one of our normal 1-drops off of Bright Glass Gear Hulk, and great main deck artifact or enchantment hate if we want it. We also have the option of Dust Rose Reliquary. So it's a 1 mana artifact. As additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature is no problem in this deck. And as Ward 2, When Dust Rose Reliquary enters, exile target artifact or creature an opponent controls until Dust Rose Reliquary leaves the battlefield. So this isn't the best O-Ring effect in the world. However, it's tutorable off a Break Glass Gearhulk. So playing it as a one of, it's kind of cool. We can play up to 2 Get Lost. 2 mana instant, destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens, just gets rid of things with big butts. We can play a 3rd Sheltered by Ghost in the main deck. It's a 2 mana aura. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0, has lifelink and ward, and when it enters, and exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghost leaves the battlefield. So we'll mostly be playing this for the aggressive decks. It's an O-Ring effect, get something out of the way, gain a bunch of life, and then the aggressive of your opponent can never catch up. We could play up to 2 Bramble Familiar. It is a 2 mana 2/2. We can tap it at a green, and we can tap and sacrifice it and discard a card to return Bramble Familiar to its owner's hand. And its adventure side is Fetch Quest, where it's a 7 mana sorcery, mill 7 cards, then put a creature, enchantment, or a land card from among the mill cards onto the battlefield. It's just a decent card. Our deck has become a little bit more mana intensive, and so having that 2 mana dork is pretty nice. And then in the late game, we can just like essentially tutor our deck, which can grab us something like Bright Glass Gearhulk or Overlord onto the battlefield, and this just gets really, really disgusting from there. We could play Tender Wild Guide as a 2 mana with Offspring 2. We can tap it to create 1 mana of any color, and we can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So this is probably competing for slots with the Bramble Familiar. But it's an additional mana dork, which is awesome. And our deck is all about creating creatures with different powers and capitalizing off of those +1/+1 counters. And Tender Wild Guide can actually help out with that quite a bit, especially since we don't have to do it as a sorcery, so we can do it as a combat trick, and it's a mana dork, which is really cool. Melira Living Cure was stock, now it's not. It's an aggressively costed 2 mana card as a 3/3. It's good against poison counters. I'm not even going to read it because it's not relevant in standard. However, we can exile Melira the Living Cure and choose another target creature or artifact. When it's put into the graveyard this turn, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control. So basically, this allows us to re-trigger enter the battlefield abilities when our creatures are answered, because we can sacrifice Melira and save that creature, which is sweet alongside Overlord or Gearhulk. Play up to 2 Seraphic Steed. It's a 2 mana 2/2 with First Strike and Lifelink, so already very, very good against these aggressive decks. And we can saddle it for 4, and whenever it attacks when it's saddled, create a 3/3 white angel creature token with flying. So it's really good in the late game, and also pretty solid blocker against the red decks. Could play a single Toby BC Befriender. It's a 3 mana 1/1. However, when it enters, create a 4/4 white beast creature token with this creature can't attack or block alone. And as long as you create 4 or more creature tokens, or as long as you control, 4 or more creature tokens, creatures you control have flying. Pretty easy to get creature tokens in this deck, so it can very often just be something that we play and then immediately win. It's 5 power for 3 mana, which is excellently costed, with upside, we're down with that. Could play Enduring Innocence. It's a 3 mana 2/1 with lifelink. Whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. So this gives, and it has the Enduring text, which when it dies, it comes back as an enchantment. But this is really good if we want to play that super, super long game and draw a bunch of cards out of our deck. We probably can't play this alongside a Melira the Living Cure or anything like that, but we draw cards off of almost everything else besides the things that make us just end the game, like Gearhulk. We play up to 3 Wiltly Fleege in the main deck. It's a 4 mana 4/4. Other green creatures get +1/+1. Other white creatures get +1/+1. And if a spell or ability opponent controls would cause you to discard this card, put it onto the battlefield instead of putting it into your graveyard. This is a lord for our entire deck. Sometimes it gives creatures +2/+2, which is really fun. So we love that. It's just like a decent creature in and of itself. However, a lot of the bounce decks are playing Hopeless Nightmare, and we can start the game with this on the battlefield if they go turn 1 Hopeless Nightmare, which is really, really sweet. Where I talked about Bright Glass Gearhulk, so Virtue of Loyalty is a 5 mana enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So really good if we're going live. We get to pump them up to maybe attack through the blockers that we need to attack through. And it's a 2 mana 2/2 with Vigilance on its adventure side. So it's good in the early game and good in the late game. We love cards like that in our Selesnya aggro deck. So you're going to be selecting 10 of these 29 cards to add to your main deck. And let's look at the sideboard. So we're going to be selecting 15 cards. We do not have anything in our sideboard yet. Elspeth's Smite is a 1-mana instant, deals 3 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. If a creature would die this turn, exile it instead. The reason this card is good is because it's good against the aggro decks. It makes Heartfire Hero go away without doing damage to you, good against the enduring cards, etc, etc. Destroy Evil is a 2-mana instant, destroy target creature toughness 4 or greater, destroy target enchantment. Really good against decks that are playing problematic enchantments, even better against big-butted blockers we're having a hard time attacking through, like Shield Raid or something. Invasion of Gobekon is a 2-mana siege. When it enters, look at target opponent's hand. You may exile a non-land card from it for as long as that card remains exiled. Its owner may play it. A spell cast this way costs 2 more to cast. So this deck is really weak to board wipes, and so being able to delay those board wipes is super important. However, the Light Shield Array on the other side is good for this deck as well, where it's an enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, remember you get this if you defeat the siege, which starts at 3, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that attacked this turn. So it allows us to get pumped up, kind of like the Wiltleaf Liege. And you can sacrifice Light Shield Array to have creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So it can stop most board wipes, not Sunfall, but pretty much every other board wipe, which is very, very powerful. Playing 2 Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. When it enters, exile all graveyards, and anything that would go to a graveyard is exiled instead. We're playing 2 Cootseal's Flanker. It is a 3-mana 3/1 with Flash, and when it enters, we get to choose one. Put a +1/+1 counter on Cootseal's Flanker for each creature that left the battlefield under your control this turn, or you gain life and scry 2, or you can exile target player's graveyard. So it's instant speed Graveyard Hate, allows us to have a blocker, select our card draw, and gain life, and can follow up after a board wipe sometime. Really good all-around card, not really targeting anything specifically, though. We could be playing 4 Aven Interrupter. This is a 3-mana 2/2. Flash and Flying. When it enters exile target spell, it becomes plotted. Spells your opponent casts from graveyards or exile cost 2 mana to cast. Really good against combo decks. Even better alongside Invasion of Gobekon to stop board wipes. Play up to 2 Split Up. It's effectively a one-sided board wipe. It's a 3-mana sorcery. Choose one, destroy all tap creatures or destroy all untap creatures. Very, very, very good against fast decks that we're attempting to race with. Paw Patch Formation is a 2-mana instant. Choose one, destroy target creature with flying, destroy card enchantment, or draw a card, create a food token. Mostly be playing this against the enchantment decks. We could play 3 Obstinate Bailoff in the sideboard. It kind of fulfills a similar role as Wiltleaf Liege. It's really for the Hopeless Nightmare decks and applying a ton of pressure to these Hopeless Nightmare decks. However, while Wiltleaf Liege works with your primary game plan, allows you to pump up your troops, Obstinate Bailoff gains 4 life when it enters the battlefield, which makes it so you can side it in against the aggressive decks, and it's totally fine as well. We could play 1 Thrun Breaker of Silence. It is a 5-mana legendary creature, 5/5. It can't be countered, it has trample, and it can't be the target of non-green spells your opponent control or abilities from non-green sources your opponent control. And during your turn, Thrun has indestructible, which means you can keep attacking with it. Really good against the hyper slow decks. It's just really hard for them to answer. Nissa is too. Nissa is a 7-mana with 2 Phyrexian mana Planeswalker that is completed, which means you can Phyrexian mana, where you can pay life or pay the green. If you paid life, it comes in with less loyalty. Its +1/+1 is create is X green Phyrexian horror creature token, where X is Nissa Ascended Animus loyalty. Its -1 is destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it's -7 until end of turn creatures you control get +1/+1 for each force you control and gain trample. So this card is super good against decks that we would either like to be destroying artifacts or enchantments that aren't super aggressive decks, or just slow decks because it can provide a threat. We could be playing those 3 Wiltleaf Liege in the sideboard. I've already talked about why it's good, but you could be playing that in the sideboard, especially if you're playing the Brightglass Gearhold version in the main deck. And a single Ghost Vacuum, additional Graveyard Hate. It's a 1-mana artifact, SL target card from a graveyard. And we can also pay 6 mana and tap it and sacrifice Ghost Vacuum to put each creature card exiled with Ghost Vacuum onto the battlefield under your control. If they're a 1/1 in addition, there are other types activate only as a sorcery. So this is not as good Graveyard Hate as Rest in Peace. However, it is Graveyard Hate, and it has upside if the game goes hyper long. So you're going to be picking 15 of these 29 cards. You're going to be picking 10 of these 29 cards for the main deck. And when you do that, you have your very own but stock version of Selesnya Cage. The first nuance is understanding how the Cage, combo works. So Collector's Cage has Hideaway 5, which means they look at the top 5 cards of the library, and they exile a card face down underneath Collector's Cage. And then Collector's Cage has an ability where you can pay 1 mana and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. And then pretty much your whole deck are not only things with different powers, but creatures that can create other creatures. So it's pretty easy to fulfill that condition on Collector's Cage. And so the big targets here are Overlord of the Mistmoors, being able to cheat that onto the battlefield turn 3. Seems pretty solid. And Selesnya Gearhulk, Wiltleaf Liege, Sandstorm Salvager really good. There's a bunch of awesome targets that we essentially get to put on the battlefield for 1 mana. And then in addition, Collector's Cage is able to pump up our creatures as combat tricks because it's instant speed. Meaning we can do it during our opponent's turn, we can do it after our opponent's tapped out, we can do it to put an Overlord of the Mistmoors on the battlefield as a blocker, which makes it really hard to play around and makes it a priority for your opponent to make sure that you don't fulfill the requirements of Collector's Cage. Speaking of the Selesnya Gearhulk, Bright Glass, I think it's called, this deck has more recently shifted towards being sort of a toolbox deck with the Gearhulk, playing a bunch of cool 1-drops like these, so that when you put a Gearhulk on the battlefield, you're able to toolbox things that you need. Being aware of the toolbox targets, especially when you're playing it, so you know whether you should play the Gearhulk now because you really need a toolbox or something, or playing against it is pretty important. And then the last interesting play pattern / nuance you should probably know about is Parting Gust on your own creatures. Because understand, most cards in this deck have enter the battlefield effects. Most of the enter the battlefield effects create tokens. Something like Overlord or Bright Glass Gearhulk, I guess that doesn't make a token, but you can search again. Parting Gust can get something out of the way, sure, so you can attack, but also the secret mode of it is bouncing something like Overlord of the Mistmoors and bringing it back, and that's even better in response to a removal spell, because then it's just a billion for 1, and you get the end of the battlefield effects again. If you like this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Check me out on social medias, links are above me and in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.